When 83-year-old Rudy Schlattner stepped onto the familiar grounds of his childhood home after an absence of 70 years, he felt like he had stepped into a dream, or perhaps a memory long buried. He never imagined that the attic of this old house, standing quietly under the weight of history, would hold a secret waiting to be uncovered. His journey back wasn't just a nostalgic visit. It was a personal mission, a longing to reconnect with the life his family had been forced to leave behind. As he gazed up at the villa, the crisp autumn air carried whispers of the past. This house, built by his father in the late 1920s, had once been a sanctuary, filled with warmth, laughter, and the simple joys of childhood. But the war had changed everything. It had ripped them away from this place, scattering them across borders and time. Now, decades later, Rudy stood at the doorstep, his heart pounding. The house was no longer his family's. It had been repurposed into a kindergarten, a place filled with children's laughter, a stark contrast to the ghosts of his past. Would he even be allowed inside? Would anything remain of what his father had left behind? Taking a deep breath, he raised a trembling hand and knocked. The door creaked open, revealing a young woman with bright, curious eyes. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked in Czech, her expression softening as she took in his aged features. Rudy swallowed the lump in his throat. "My name is Rudy Schlattner," he said, his voice thick with emotion. This was my family's home before the war." The woman's eyes widened. "Schlattner?" she repeated as if tasting the name. "We've heard stories about the original owners." Then, with a warm smile, she stepped aside. "Please, come in. I'm the director of the kindergarten." As Rudy crossed the threshold, a flood of memories surged through him. The layout was still the same, yet everything had changed. Gone were the old paintings, the heavy wooden furniture, the polished floors he once raced across as a child. In their place were colorful drawings, tiny chairs, and the cheerful chaos of a kindergarten. The walls no longer carried the weight of his family's history, but instead displayed the innocent creativity of children. "It's different," Rudy murmured, his eyes glistening. The director looked at him with quiet understanding. "What brings you back after all these years?" Rudy hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Before we were forced to leave, my father hid something in this house, our family's possessions. He always believed we'd come back for them one day." The director's eyebrows lifted. "Hidden possessions? After all this time?" Rudy nodded. "I know it sounds far-fetched, but my father was a clever man. He told me there was a secret hiding place, though I was just a child. The details are blurry, but I believe it's in the attic." He exhaled deeply, the weight of his request settling over him. "Would it be possible for me to search there?" The director studied him for a long moment, as if weighing the past against the present. Finally, she nodded. "Let's go see what we can find." And with that, Rudy stepped forward, hoping that time had not erased the last traces of his family's lost history. The director hesitated, glancing around at the colorful drawings and tiny chairs that had replaced the remnants of the past. "Mr. Schlattner, I understand how important this is to you, but the house has undergone renovations. The attic has been checked and used for storage. Are you sure anything could still be up there?" Rudy's grip tightened on his cane. His eyes, sharp with determination, held a fire that defied his 83 years. "I have to try. This is my last chance, to honor my father's faith that we would return." The director studied him for a long moment. Then, with a small nod, she relented. "All right, Mr. Schlattner. You can search the attic, but given the historical significance, officials will need to be present. Is that acceptable?" Relief swept over Rudy. "Yes, of course. Thank you. Truly." The next morning, he arrived just before 9 a.m., his heart pounding. The director was waiting, along with 2 local officials and a representative from the regional museum. It was a small but serious group, ready for an unexpected kind of treasure hunt. At the foot of the attic stairs, Rudy took a deep breath. The wooden steps creaked beneath them as they climbed, dust motes swirling in the morning light. With each step, memories stirred. His father's voice, the hurried whispers of their departure, the unspoken promise that something had been left behind. His trembling hand brushed the worn banister, and suddenly, he was a boy again. Before war shattered everything. Rudy had been just 12 years old in 1938 when the world around him began to change. His home in the Sudetenland, the German-speaking region of Czechoslovakia, was no longer just a place of childhood games and warm family dinners. It had become a political flashpoint, a land Hitler had set his sights on. One evening, he had overheard his parents speaking in hushed, fearful tones. "Carl, what will happen to us?" His mother's voice trembled. His father's reply was heavy. "Hitler wants the Sudetenland. The Allies may let him have it, to avoid another war." At the time, Rudy hadn't understood the weight of those words, but he had felt the fear that crept into their home like a cold wind. Now, decades later, as he reached the attic door, that fear returned, not of war, but of what time might have erased. Little did he know, what lay beyond that door would shake not just his past, but the present as well. Well, before we continue, please hit that like and subscribe button for more awesome stories like this. All right, guys, now let's back on track. On September 30th, 1938, Rudy Schlatner's world shifted in an instant. The radio crackled with static before a solemn voice delivered the news. Great Britain, France, and Italy had signed the Munich Agreement. Hitler would have the Sudetenland. "They've abandoned us," Carl muttered, his face pale as he absorbed the betrayal. "Chamberlain calls this peace for our time. But at what cost?" Rudy, just 12 years old, watched his father with growing unease. He didn't fully grasp the weight of the moment, but he felt it. The suffocating fear settling over their home like an early winter frost. A month later, the fear took form. German troops marched into their town, their boots striking the cobblestones in unison. From his bedroom window, Rudy watched neighbors cheer as soldiers paraded down the street. But inside his own home, there was no celebration, only silence, only dread. Over the next few years, life in the Sudetenland grew tighter, like a noose slowly tightening around them. Restrictions increased, whispers turned into warnings, and the once familiar streets became hostile territory. By 1945, as the war neared its violent end, new rumors surfaced. One night, Carl gathered the family in the living room, his expression grave. "President Benesch has issued a decree," he announced, his voice heavy with resignation. "All ethnic Germans must leave Czechoslovakia." Rudy, now 13, felt panic rise in his chest. "But this is our home. We can't just—" "We have no choice," Carl interrupted, gripping his son's shoulder. "But we will not leave empty-handed." He motioned for Rudy to follow. Together, they climbed the attic stairs, their footsteps heavy with unspoken fears. In the dim glow of a single lamp, Carl worked quickly, stashing heirlooms, documents, and small treasures into hidden compartments within the walls. "Watch carefully, Rudy," he whispered, his hands moving with precision. "Remember this. One day, we will return." They worked through the night, packing away the last tangible pieces of their past. At dawn, with only the clothes on their backs, the Schlatners joined the endless procession of displaced families, leaving behind the only home Rudy had ever known. As they crossed the border, Rudy turned for one final look, his father's words echoing in his mind. "One day, we will return." Now, 70 years later, Rudy stood in that same attic, his heart pounding. Around him, local officials and a museum representative watched as he traced his fingers along the aged wooden beams. Dust clung to the air, thick with time and forgotten stories. They searched for hours, sifting through history, uncovering nothing but dust and disappointment. Just as Rudy was about to surrender to time's cruel erasure, his fingers brushed against something different. A wooden panel, slightly raised, near the attic's farthest corner. He froze. "Wait!" he called out, his voice trembling with exhaustion and hope. "I think I found something." Dr. Novak and the local officials gathered closely as Rudy traced his fingers over the wooden panel. His pulse quickened. Decades had passed, but the memory of his father's words remained sharp. Sometimes, the most important things are hidden in plain sight. His hands trembled as he pressed against the grain, searching for the secret his father had buried in time. At first, nothing. A heavy silence filled the attic, broken only by the sound of their own breathing. Then, click. A thin string slipped from behind the panel, barely visible in the dim attic light. Rudy inhaled sharply, his eyes misting over. "The string," he whispered, almost to himself. "Just as father said." A surge of emotion coursed through him. He grasped the string and pulled. The wooden panel groaned as it shifted, and then, with a final creak, it swung open. A stunned silence fell over the group as the secret compartment revealed itself. Behind the false wall stood a set of shelves, untouched, unspoiled by time. Each shelf was meticulously arranged, a testament to Carl Schlatner's careful planning. Leather-bound books, neatly stacked parcels, and delicate porcelain figurines rested exactly as they had been placed 70 years earlier. But at the heart of it all, on the middle shelf, sat a small, ornate jewelry box. Rudy's breath caught in his throat. He knew that box, his mother's jewelry box. With trembling fingers, he reached for it. The wood was smooth beneath his hands, as if time had not dared to touch it. Slowly, he lifted the lid. A familiar, delicate melody filled the attic, a lullaby his mother used to hum as she tucked him into bed. The sound wrapped around him like an embrace from the past, and for a moment, he was a child again, safe in his mother's arms, before the world had changed. Tears welled in his eyes. "He did it," Rudy whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Father managed to preserve everything." News of the discovery spread quickly, drawing the attention of historians and journalists alike. Experts from the local museum arrived to carefully document and catalog each item. What had begun as one man's search for a lost past had transformed into a historical revelation. Rudy watched as the artifacts were carefully packed, knowing they were no longer just his family's possessions. They were echoes of an era, fragments of a world lost to war and exile. A young reporter approached him, notebook in hand. "Mr. Schlatner, how does it feel to find all of this after so many years?" Rudy exhaled slowly, his gaze lingering on the treasures of his childhood. "These aren't just my family's belongings anymore," he said, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling within him. "They're a testament to all those who lost their homes, their histories. By preserving them in the museum, we ensure that their stories, our stories, will never be forgotten." As the final box was carefully loaded into the museum's van, Rudy stood in the now empty attic, his fingers tracing the edges of the false panel that had safeguarded his family's past for so long. The air felt different now, lighter, as if the attic itself had finally exhaled after decades of holding its secret. Dr. Novak stepped beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Your father would be proud," he said softly. "You honored his wish. These treasures and the stories they hold will live on for generations." Rudy nodded, his expression a mix of sorrow and satisfaction. "I came here hoping to reclaim a piece of my past," he admitted, "but I've gained something far greater. I've connected history to the future, and maybe that's the best way to honor my father, not by keeping these things, but by sharing our story with the world. As they descended from the attic one last time, Rudy paused at the window, gazing out at the town below. So much had changed, yet so much remained the same. The hidden artifacts were more than just relics of a lost time. They were a bridge, linking the past to the present, proving that memory, perseverance, and the human spirit endure even in the face of history's upheavals. With one last glance at the attic, he turned and walked down the stairs. And for the first time in decades, he felt a profound sense of peace. He may not have been able to reclaim his father's belongings, but he had reclaimed something far more precious, his family's legacy. As Rudy stepped outside, the warm sunlight greeted him, casting long shadows behind him as he moved forward. His story, once buried behind a hidden panel, was no longer a secret. It would live on, inspiring others to uncover and honor their own histories. So, what do you think? Should Rudy's family have kept the treasure, or was the museum the right place for it? And what forgotten stories might be waiting in your own family's past? Well, share your thoughts in the comment section below. And as we always say, if you have enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe for more amazing stories like this. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.